Some decisions change your future. Others wait quietly until years later when life forces you to remember them. For Bianca Marie Cross, that moment arrived 6 years after she walked away from the man who loved her most. The sharp crack of a judge's gavel echoed through courtroom 3. The sound lingered in the silence. A court clerk gathered the final documents. Lawyers quietly packed their briefcases. Chairs scraped against the polished wooden floor as everyone prepared to leave. The hearing was over. So was the marriage. Bianca remained seated. She stared at the stack of papers lying in front of her. 6 years. 6 years of promises. 6 years of hope. 6 years of believing she had made the right choice. All of it had ended with a judge's signature. Across the room, Damien Cross buttoned his expensive suit jacket. Without saying a single word, he picked up his briefcase and walked away. He never looked back. Neither did the woman now walking beside him. Within seconds, they disappeared through the courtroom doors. Bianca was alone. The court clerk gently placed the signed divorce papers into a brown file and slid it across the table. "It's over, Mrs. Cross." Those 4 words landed harder than anything the judge had said. Bianca slowly picked up the file. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Then, with unsteady steps, she walked toward the courthouse exit. Outside, a cold afternoon rain covered the city. People hurried past beneath umbrellas. Traffic rolled through the wet streets. Life continued. As if nothing had happened, Bianca stopped halfway down the courthouse steps. She closed her eyes. She drew one slow breath, then another. When she finally looked across the street, a giant digital billboard flickered to life. At first, she noticed only the applause. A crowd stood cheering. Then, she saw a confident smile, a familiar posture. Finally, she saw the face. Nathaniel Alexander Watts, the man she had once left behind. Healthy, confident, respected, standing before hundreds of families whose lives had been changed by his foundation. Across the bottom of the billboard appeared the words, "The Nathaniel Watts Foundation, restoring hope, rebuilding lives." Bianca's breathing caught. Without warning, fragments of another rainy evening crashed into her mind. A candle-lit restaurant, a velvet ring box, a trembling voice asking a question, a silence that changed 2 lives forever. She lowered her eyes. Some memories never ask for permission before returning. Rain continued to fall around her. Cars passed, people hurried by, but Bianca never moved. For the first time in 6 years, the future she had chosen no longer mattered. Only the past did. Fade to black. Bianca stood motionless beneath the courthouse awning for several seconds after the billboard disappeared behind a passing bus. The rain continued to fall. Cold drops splashed against the concrete steps, while strangers hurried past without giving her a second glance. No one noticed the woman whose life had just ended. No one knew that only minutes earlier, a judge had reduced 6 years of marriage to a stack of signed papers, now tucked inside the brown file beneath her arm. Bianca tightened her grip on the file before slowly walking toward the parking lot. Near the far corner sat an aging silver sedan. The paint had begun to fade. Small patches of rust marked the edges of the doors. One headlight was cracked. It was a long way from the luxury vehicles she had once believed would define her future. She unlocked the driver's door. Before climbing inside, she looked through the rear window. 2 young children waited quietly in the back seat. One clutched a worn teddy bear tightly against a small chest. The other watched the courthouse entrance, searching every face until Bianca finally appeared. Neither child smiled. They had learned that silence often arrived before bad news. Bianca climbed into the driver's seat. She gently placed the brown file on the passenger seat beside her. For several long moments, no one spoke. Then, a tiny voice broke the silence. "Mummy." Bianca looked into the rearview mirror. "Is everything okay?" She forced the gentlest smile she could manage. "Everything will be all right." The words sounded comforting. They also sounded like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. She slipped the key into the ignition. The engine struggled before finally starting with a tired vibration. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, the city carried on as though nothing had happened. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Coffee shops buzzed with conversation. Business meetings continued. Traffic lights changed from red to green. Life had moved forward. Only Bianca felt trapped between yesterday and tomorrow. Rain drifted across the windshield. The steady rhythm of the wipers became the only sound inside the car. 6 years earlier, she had believed she was driving toward the life she deserved. Today, for the first time in her life, home no longer felt like a place. It felt like something she had lost. 20 minutes later, the car turned onto a quiet residential street lined with modest townhouses. Children laughed beneath covered porches. A delivery driver unloaded groceries. An elderly couple carefully watered flowers despite the drizzle. Ordinary lives, ordinary people. Bianca parked in front of a small townhouse with chipped white paint and a porch light that flickered every few seconds. This was where they lived now. Home was something Bianca was still searching for. The children quietly climbed out of the car. One of them paused halfway to the front door before turning around. "Mummy, are you coming?" Bianca blinked away the tears gathering in her eyes and smiled as warmly as she could. "I'll be there in a minute." The child nodded and disappeared inside with the other. Bianca remained behind the steering wheel. Her hands refused to let go. She closed her eyes. Images surfaced without warning. Late-night arguments, broken promises, doors slamming. Long nights of silence that somehow hurt more than shouting ever could. Tears she had hidden from her children. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. She wasn't crying because the marriage had ended. She was crying because she no longer recognized the woman she had become. Just then, a sharp vibration echoed through the silent car. Her phone. It rested beside the brown file on the passenger seat. The screen glowed. Unknown caller. Bianca stared at it without moving. The ringing filled the silence. Once, twice, 3 times. Her trembling hand slowly reached toward the phone. Just before her fingers touched the screen, the ringing stopped. Silence. Bianca let out a slow breath. Then, the phone rang again. She slowly turned the phone over. The screen glowed brighter against the dark interior of the car. She took one shaky breath. Bianca's trembling fingers hovered over the glowing screen. The phone continued to ring. She swallowed hard. For a brief moment, she considered letting it go unanswered. Whoever it was, she didn't have the strength for another conversation. Not today. The ringing stopped. Silence settled over the car once again. Bianca leaned back against the driver's seat and slowly closed her eyes. The rain drummed softly against the roof. She released a slow, unsteady breath. Then, her phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't another call. It was a text message. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the car. Unknown number. "Mrs. Cross?" Bianca frowned. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Another vibration. "Please don't ignore this." Her heartbeat quickened. She slowly looked around the quiet street. No one appeared to be watching. Only the steady rain, the empty road, and the flickering porch light. Another message appeared. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. A fourth message followed almost immediately. "You'll want to hear what I have to say." Bianca tightened her grip on the phone. Who was this? How did they know her name? Why today? Of all days? Her thumb drifted toward the keyboard. She stopped. No, not yet. Instead, her finger moved toward the delete option. One tap, and whoever had sent these messages would disappear forever. She stared at the screen, then slowly lowered the phone. Something inside her refused to erase them. She locked the screen and placed the phone beside the brown divorce file resting on the passenger seat. Whoever had sent those messages could wait, right now. Her children needed her. Bianca stepped out into the rain and quietly walked toward the townhouse. Inside, the house was warm but unusually silent. One child sat cross-legged on the living room floor, carefully coloring inside a picture book. The other remained curled up on the sofa, hugging the same worn teddy bear. The television stayed off. The room felt strangely peaceful. Neither child asked about the courthouse. Neither asked where their father was. Bianca's heart ached. Children should never become so accustomed to silence. She smiled as naturally as she could. "Who's hungry?" 2 small smiles appeared. "I'll make something." She walked into the kitchen. Opening one of the cupboards, she paused. 2 slices of bread, a nearly empty jar of peanut butter, a handful of crackers. She quietly rearranged everything. The children would eat first. She could eat later. Some sacrifices became so familiar that they no longer felt like sacrifices. As she prepared the sandwiches, soft laughter drifted from the living room. For the first time that day, the house sounded alive. Bianca allowed herself the smallest smile. No matter what had happened, no matter what tomorrow might bring, those 2 children were still her reason to keep moving forward. Then, her phone vibrated again. She froze. For several long seconds, she didn't move. Finally, she walked back into the living room and picked it up. The screen lit up. One final message appeared. "Tomorrow, Sepul Asa, Riverside Cafe. Come alone. A pause." Then, one final line appeared beneath the others. "Bring the brown divorce file." Bianca froze. Her eyes slowly shifted toward the brown file lying on the kitchen counter where she had placed it moments earlier. Her breathing stopped. How could a complete stranger possibly know about the file? Outside, the rain grew heavier. Inside, the ticking clock echoed through the silent house. She had no idea who had sent the messages. She didn't know whether she should be afraid or whether this meeting would finally answer questions she didn't even know she had. But one thing had become painfully clear. If she walked into Riverside Cafe tomorrow morning, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Bianca remained frozen in the middle of the living room. The phone felt heavier than it had only moments before. Her eyes drifted back to the final message. "Bring the brown divorce file." A chill crept down her spine. She slowly turned toward the kitchen counter. The brown file lay exactly where she had left it. No one outside the courtroom should have known she was carrying it. Not the children, not the neighbors, not even Damien. Yet somehow, someone knew. She picked up the file and held it against her chest. It suddenly felt less like a stack of legal papers and more like the key to a mystery she didn't yet understand. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mummy?" Bianca turned. One of the children stood quietly in the hallway, still holding the worn teddy bear. "Are you coming to eat with us?" The innocence in those words melted away the fear on her face. She smiled softly. "Of course." The child smiled back and disappeared into the dining area. Bianca placed the phone face down on the counter. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight belonged to her children. She joined them at the small dining table. The sandwiches were simple. The conversation was even simpler. One child proudly talked about a drawing from school. The other laughed over a joke that only children could understand. For the first time that day, Bianca laughed too. It wasn't a long laugh. It wasn't a carefree laugh, but it was real. For a few precious moments, the weight she had carried since leaving the courthouse became just a little lighter. After dinner, as bedtime approached, one of the children quietly wrapped small arms around Bianca without saying a word. Bianca closed her eyes. She held the hug a little longer than usual. In that silent embrace, she remembered exactly why she had to keep going. Later that evening, after both children had fallen asleep, Bianca quietly walked through the townhouse. She checked that the front door was locked. She switched off the living room lights. She paused outside the children's bedroom. The gentle sound of their breathing filled the quiet hallway. Whatever happened next, Every decision she made had to protect them. She returned to the kitchen. The brown file still rested on the counter. Beside it, her phone. She picked it up. No new messages. No missed calls. Only silence. She slowly opened the brown file. Her eyes moved across the pages without really reading them. Then she quietly closed it again. The answers she needed were not inside those papers. Her attention returned to the final message. Tomorrow, Sepul, a.m. Riverside Cafe. Come alone. Bring the brown divorce file. Her thumb hovered over the screen. One tap, and the messages would disappear forever. She remained perfectly still. Then, she slowly locked the phone. She wasn't ready to delete them. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. The last light of evening faded behind the clouds. Night slowly settled over the quiet neighborhood. Bianca walked to the kitchen window and stared into the darkness. She switched off the kitchen light. The room disappeared into shadow. Only the glow of her phone remained. One unread message. One meeting. One decision. She had no idea that by this time tomorrow, the past she believed she had left behind would be standing right in front of her. She took one slow breath, then placed the brown file beside her handbag. For the first time since leaving the courthouse, she made her decision. She would go. Bianca's eyes opened before the alarm could ring. Sleep had come in short, restless moments. When the alarm finally sounded, she was already awake. For several seconds, she stared at the ceiling, hoping the messages from the night before had been nothing more than a dream. Then, reality returned. Tomorrow, Sepullo RKM, Riverside Cafe. Come alone. Bring the brown divorce file. The phone rested on the bedside table. She reached for it. The messages were still there. Every word, exactly as she remembered. She slowly sat up and glanced toward the hallway. The townhouse remained quiet. Soon the children would wake, and another ordinary school morning would begin. She pushed the mystery to the back of her mind. For now, her children came first. Within the hour, the small kitchen filled with familiar routines. Breakfast, school uniforms, packed lunches. One child searched frantically for a missing shoe. The other carefully tucked the worn teddy bear into a backpack before zipping it closed. Bianca couldn't help smiling. For a little while, life almost felt normal again. When the school bus arrived, both children hugged her goodbye. One of them held on a little longer than usual. Bianca kissed the child's forehead. "I'll see you this afternoon." She stood on the sidewalk, waving until the yellow school bus disappeared around the corner. Only then did the silence return. She walked back to her car. The brown divorce file rested on the passenger seat. Her phone lay beside it. No new messages, no explanations, only silence. Bianca climbed into the driver's seat. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. She started the engine. Then, she switched it off. She closed her eyes. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe whoever sent those messages wanted exactly this. For her to walk willingly into a trap, she opened her eyes again. The brown file remained exactly where it had been. Someone knew about it. Someone who should never have known. If she drove home now, she might spend the rest of her life wondering why. Bianca inhaled slowly, then started the engine once more. This time, she shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. The streets grew busier as she crossed town. Every traffic light gave her another chance to turn back. She never did. Finally, the familiar sign came into view. Riverside Cafe. She parked across the street. For several moments, she remained inside the car. The brown file rested on her lap. Her heartbeat echoed in the silence. She stepped onto the sidewalk. Before crossing the street, she looked around one last time. Nothing seemed unusual. People walked past carrying shopping bags. Cars rolled through the intersection. A cyclist disappeared around the corner. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She crossed the street, reached for the cafe door, The bell above it chimed softly as she stepped inside. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. Customers chatted quietly. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. Nothing seemed out of place. Then, her eyes settled on a table near the window. A single figure sat waiting. The stranger slowly looked up. Their eyes met. Bianca stopped walking. Bianca stood motionless. The stranger continued watching her from across the cafe. There was nothing threatening about the person's appearance. Well-dressed, calm, patient, almost as though they had expected Bianca to hesitate before walking over. She tightened her grip on the brown divorce file. Every instinct told her to leave. She could still turn around. She could walk out the door and pretend none of this had ever happened. Instead, she took a slow breath, then crossed the room. She stopped beside the table. "You asked me to come?" The stranger held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Thank you for coming." The voice was calm, respectful. Bianca didn't sit down. "I don't even know who you are." "You will." The answer only deepened her suspicion. Customers continued chatting around them. A waitress walked past carrying 2 cups of coffee. To everyone else, it was just another ordinary morning. But Bianca felt as though the entire cafe had fallen silent. Before speaking again, the stranger carefully straightened the unopened envelope resting on the table, then quietly gestured toward the empty chair. "Please." After a long pause, Bianca sat down. She never let go of the brown divorce file. The stranger noticed. "You were right to bring it." Bianca's eyes narrowed. "How did you know about this file?" The stranger remained silent for a moment. Instead of answering, they slowly slid the sealed envelope across the table. "I'd like you to keep this." Bianca didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Proof." "Proof of what?" "That your life changed long before yesterday's divorce." Her heartbeat quickened. "I don't understand." "I know. And that's exactly why I asked you to come." Bianca looked from the envelope to the stranger. Nothing made sense. She pushed the envelope back across the table. "I'm not opening anything until you tell me who you are." For the first time, the stranger smiled. A fair request. The smile quickly disappeared. "My name isn't important." "What matters?" The stranger looked directly into Bianca's eyes. "Is that someone spent years making sure you never learned the truth." A cold silence settled between them. Bianca's fingers tightened around the edge of the brown divorce file. The stranger leaned forward. "This meeting isn't really about your divorce." Bianca stared without speaking. "It isn't even about Damien." The stranger gently rested a hand on the unopened envelope. "Everything begins with what's inside this envelope." Bianca looked around the cafe. No one appeared to be paying attention. People chatted. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. A barista called another customer's name. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Yet, for the first time, she wondered whether this meeting had been watched long before she arrived. The stranger gently pushed the envelope across the table. It slid silently over the polished wood, then stopped, only inches from Bianca's hand. She stared at it. She didn't reach for it. For several long seconds, Bianca couldn't take her eyes off the envelope. It rested on the table between them, ordinary, unmarked. Yet it felt heavier than the brown divorce file she still held against her side. The stranger remained perfectly still, never rushing her, never speaking. Finally, Bianca reached forward. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the envelope. She hesitated. "What happens if I open this?" The stranger answered quietly. "You begin to understand." Bianca swallowed. Slowly, she broke the seal. Inside were only 3 items: a faded photograph, a folded newspaper clipping, and a handwritten note. She picked up the photograph first. The picture had clearly been taken years earlier. A charity fundraising gala. People dressed in elegant evening wear smiled toward the camera. Her eyes moved across the faces, then stopped. She recognized herself. She looked younger, confident, hopeful. standing only a few feet away from someone whose face had been hidden. Bianca frowned. She carefully unfolded the photograph. A deep crease ran directly across the man's face. The photograph had been folded so many times that the crease almost erased his features. She could tell he was standing beside her, but she still couldn't recognize him. She looked up. What is this supposed to mean? The stranger didn't answer. Instead, they nodded toward the newspaper clipping. Bianca unfolded it. The article described a charity fundraising gala held 6 years earlier. Her eyes scanned the page. One sentence had been circled in red ink. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Her breathing slowed. "I was there," she whispered. The stranger gave a small nod. "You were." Bianca looked back at the photograph. Something about it felt familiar, important, like a memory struggling to return. Her attention shifted to the final item, the handwritten note. She unfolded it carefully. Only one sentence had been written. "The biggest mistake of your life wasn't your divorce." Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Bianca slowly lowered the note. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The cafe seemed to disappear around her. She looked from the photograph to the newspaper clipping, to the handwritten note, then back at the stranger. "Who are you?" The stranger said nothing. They simply watched her. Some truths don't disappear with time. They wait, hidden beneath forgotten memories, buried inside unanswered questions. Bianca had finally opened the envelope, but instead of finding the answer she expected, she found 3 pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed. A photograph, a newspaper clipping, and a handwritten note that refused to explain itself. Now, every answer seemed to point back to a single night. 6 years earlier, as she looked across the cafe table, waiting for the stranger to finally speak. Bianca had no idea that the first truth she was about to hear would destroy everything she believed about her past. The silence between them lingered. Bianca's question still hung in the air. "Who are you?" The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, they lowered their eyes to the photograph lying between them. For several seconds, they simply stared at the deep crease running across the man's face. When they finally spoke, their voice was calm. "My name isn't the important part." Bianca's expression hardened. "It is to me." A faint smile crossed the stranger's face. "I understand. But if I tell you my name before I tell you why you're here, you'll spend the next hour trying to figure out who I am, instead of understanding what was taken from you." Bianca folded her arms. "I'm not leaving this cafe until I know exactly why you brought me here." The stranger nodded slowly. "I was hoping you'd say that." They gently pushed the photograph aside. "I wasn't a guest at that charity gala. I worked there." Bianca frowned. "You worked there?" "Yes. I was part of the event operations team. I watched hundreds of people arrive that evening, but only one person unknowingly walked away from the most important moment of her life." Bianca's heartbeat quickened. "What are you talking about?" The stranger looked directly into her eyes. "You." She shook her head. "No, I would remember." The stranger slowly shook their head. "You remember arriving. You remember smiling for photographs. You remember leaving. But everything that happened after that, they made sure you never understood." Bianca leaned forward. "Who made sure?" The stranger didn't answer. Instead, they reached beside their chair and lifted an old leather folder. The folder showed years of wear. Its corners were bent. Its edges had faded. It had clearly been opened countless times. They placed it carefully on the table. "I've carried this for 6 years." Bianca stared at it. "Why?" "Because someone wanted every document inside it to disappear." The stranger opened the folder. Inside were attendance records, guest registrations, staff schedules, security logs. Every page had been carefully preserved. Bianca stared in disbelief. "How is this possible?" "Because I refused to destroy them." The stranger carefully removed one final document. Unlike the others, this page had been folded only once. They turned it over, then gently placed it in front of Bianca. Her eyes immediately fell to the signature at the bottom. Damien Cross. She stopped breathing. She looked up at the stranger. Why does my husband's name appear on documents from 6 years ago? The stranger didn't answer. They simply watched Bianca as the color drained from her face. For the first time, she realized Damien had been part of this story long before he became her husband. The signature refused to leave Bianca's mind. Damien Cross. She read it again, then again. Each time, she hoped she had made a mistake. Slowly, she looked up. No. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. This has to be some kind of coincidence. The stranger remained calm. It isn't. Bianca pushed the document across the table. My husband wasn't even part of my life 6 years ago. I didn't know him. I had never met him. The stranger nodded. That's true. Then why is his name here? The stranger folded their hands together. Because Damien wasn't there as your husband. He was there representing Cross Financial Group. Bianca frowned. Cross Financial? His family's company. The words settled heavily between them. Bianca searched her memory. She remembered the gala, the music, the speeches, the photographs. But she couldn't remember seeing Damien. I don't understand. You weren't supposed to. The stranger carefully opened the leather folder once more. They removed another document. This one was different. A staff movement log. Every executive who entered the private reception lounge had signed in. Every departure had been recorded. The stranger placed a finger on one line. There. Bianca leaned closer. Her eyes followed the stranger's finger. Damien Cross. Private Executive Lounge. Time of entry. Time of departure. His signature. Her breathing became uneven. He was there. The stranger nodded. For most of the evening, Bianca looked back at the photograph. Then at the log. Then back again. Pieces that had never belonged together were beginning to fit. She looked at the stranger. What happened inside that lounge? The stranger's expression changed. For the first time, there was hesitation. I can't answer that. Not yet. Bianca's frustration surfaced. You've waited 6 years to find me. You bring me documents. You tell me my ex-husband was involved. And now you're telling me you can't answer the only question that matters? The stranger leaned forward. Because the answer isn't written in these records. It belongs to someone else. Bianca stared at them. Who? The stranger slowly closed the folder. The only man who walked away from that night with even less than you did. The cafe seemed to disappear around Bianca. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Only one face came to mind. The same face she had seen on the billboard. The same face hidden beneath the deep crease in the photograph. She was almost afraid to ask the next question. The silence between them became almost unbearable. Bianca couldn't look away from the photograph. The crease that cut across the man's face no longer felt accidental. It felt deliberate. She slowly raised her eyes. Who did this? The stranger remained quiet. Then, for the first time since the meeting began, they answered. Someone who needed you to believe that night was over. Bianca frowned. I don't understand. No, you weren't allowed to. The stranger reached into the leather folder one final time. This time, they removed a small cream-colored envelope. Time had stained its edges. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting across the front remained clear. For Bianca, her breath caught. Slowly, the stranger turned the envelope over. The seal had never been broken. Bianca stared at it. It was never opened. The strangers shook their head. It was never delivered. A cold wave swept through Bianca. Who wrote it? I can't tell you that. Not yet. Bianca's voice trembled. Why? Because if I give you that answer now, you'll stop asking the questions that matter even more. She looked down at the unopened envelope. 6 years. It had remained sealed for 6 years. Her fingers hovered above it. She wanted to touch it. She wanted to open it. But somehow, she was afraid. Afraid of what those pages might change. Afraid of what they might take away. The stranger gently placed a hand over the envelope. "Not here." Bianca looked up. "What do you mean?" The stranger glanced toward the cafe entrance. For the first time since the meeting began, there was genuine concern in their eyes. "This isn't the place." Bianca instinctively turned to look around. Nothing seemed unusual. People laughed. Coffee cups clinked. A waiter crossed the room. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Yet, for reasons she couldn't explain, she no longer felt alone. She turned back toward the stranger. "Who are you protecting me from?" The stranger didn't answer. Instead, they carefully slipped the unopened envelope back into the leather folder. Then they stood. "We don't have much time." Bianca remained seated, confused, frightened, determined. As the stranger walked toward the cafe door, they stopped without turning around. "When you left that ballroom 6 years ago, you believed you were walking away from one man." A long silence followed. "You had no idea someone else had already decided the rest of your life." The stranger walked out. Bianca sat frozen. The untouched coffee had gone cold. The photograph, the security log, the newspaper clipping, every piece now pointed toward one impossible truth. Her past had not unfolded by chance. Someone had rewritten her past, but the truth was far more dangerous than Bianca could imagine. In episode 3, one unexpected encounter changes everything. And before Bianca can make sense of what she's discovered, she realizes she's no longer alone. The truth has been watching her all along. Find out in episode 3. Before you go, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of Cognora.